Remember the alien king, the one who defied expectations by saving a disabled dragon? Well, that was just the prologue. Now he faces a galactic empire riddled with political intrigue and ancient prophecies. What happens when his compassionate past collides with the ruthless demands of cosmic power? King Valen stood on the crystal balcony of the Imperial Spire, gazing at the swirling nebula that painted the night sky in shades of purple and gold. 3 months had passed since his coronation, yet the memory of how he got here still felt like a fever dream. He wasn't born into royalty. He wasn't a decorated general or a cunning politician. He was simply a healer who couldn't turn away from suffering, even when that suffering belonged to a creature the entire empire had abandoned. The dragon's name was Ember. She had been cast aside by the previous regime, her wings crippled in a battle that the old king had deemed a failure. In the star-forged empire, weakness was unforgivable. But Valen saw something else in those dimming eyes, a spark of defiance, a will to survive that mirrored his own quiet rebellion against the empire's brutal traditions. He spent 2 years in secret, using forgotten healing techniques and experimental medicine to restore what others believed was beyond repair. When Ember finally flew again, her wings glowing with renewed strength, the news spread like wildfire. The people saw it as a miracle. The old king saw it as a threat. Within weeks, revolution swept through the empire, and Valen found himself thrust onto a throne he never wanted. "Your Majesty, the council awaits." The voice belonged to Commander Thane, a grizzled veteran with scars that told stories of 100 battles. He was one of the few military leaders who supported Valen's ascension, but even his loyalty came with doubt. Valen turned from the view, his robes feeling heavier than any armor. "Let them wait a moment longer." Thane's expression softened slightly. "They grow restless. The traditionalists are already questioning your methods. Having the dragon at your side during council meetings, it unsettles them." "Good," Valen replied, though his heart raced with anxiety. "If they're unsettled, they're paying attention." As they walked through the marble corridors, Valen could feel the weight of countless eyes upon him. Servants bowed, but their movements were stiff, uncertain. Guards saluted, but their faces remained unreadable. He had liberated them from a tyrant, yet he remained an outsider, a healer playing at politics in a world designed for warriors and schemers. The council chamber was a vast circular room with walls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. 12 seats surrounded a central platform where the king was expected to stand, exposed to scrutiny from all sides. It was designed to make the ruler feel vulnerable, a reminder that power in the Starforged Empire was never truly secure. Valen stepped onto the platform and immediately the murmuring ceased. 12 pairs of eyes locked onto him, some curious, some hostile, all calculating. "My king," began High Chancellor Morvis, a thin man with silver skin and eyes like frozen stars. "We must discuss the matter of your companion." As if on cue, Ember descended through the open dome above, her massive form casting shadows across the chamber. She landed beside Valen with surprising grace, folding her wings and settling into a protective stance. The dragon's scales shimmered with an inner light, each movement a testament to her complete recovery. Several council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "The dragon stays," Valen said firmly. "She is my advisor, my protector, and the living symbol of what this empire can become. A place where the broken can be made whole, where compassion is strength, not weakness." "Noble words," Morvis replied, his voice dripping with condescension. "But the other empires do not share your philosophy. The Crimson Dominion sees your mercy as softness. The Void Collective views your unconventional methods as chaos. And the Eternal Synthesis." He paused for effect. "They believe you are a heretic who disrupts the natural order." Valen met his gaze without flinching. "Then let them think what they wish. I did not ask for this throne, but I will not rule as my predecessor did. The Starforged Empire will change whether the traditionalists approve or not." A woman with crystalline features spoke up from her seat. "Change requires time, Your Majesty. But our enemies will not grant us that luxury. Reports indicate that all 3 rival empires are mobilizing their fleets. They see your ascension as an opportunity to test our resolve, to probe for weaknesses." "Then we must show them strength," Commander Thane interjected. "But strength through unity, not the old ways of intimidation and fear." "Unity?" Lord Garrick, a bulky figure with stone-like skin, laughed bitterly. "You speak of unity while our king parades a crippled beast as his symbol of power? The other empires are laughing at us." Ember's eyes flared with anger, but Valen placed a calming hand on her scaled neck. Ember was crippled. Now she is whole. If our enemies fail to see the significance of that transformation, then they are blind to the truth that resilience and adaptation are the greatest strengths any civilization can possess. The chamber fell silent. Even Morvis seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Valen continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. I understand your concerns. I know many of you doubt me. But consider this, the old ways led us to stagnation. We conquered through fear and held power through cruelty. Where did that leave us? Surrounded by enemies, distrusted by allies, and rotting from within. If we continue down that path, we will destroy ourselves long before any rival empire gets the chance. And your alternative? Morvis asked. Kindness and dragon medicine? Vision, Valen replied. The courage to forge a new path. The wisdom to learn from what came before without being enslaved by it. As the council debated late into the night, Valen couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was stirring in the cosmos. Strange reports had been filtering in from the outer territories, unexplained energy signatures, ancient ruins awakening after millennia of silence, and whispers of prophecies long dismissed as myth. When the meeting finally adjourned, Valen returned to his chambers exhausted but restless. Ember followed, her presence a comfort in the lonely expanse of the royal quarters. They hate me, Valen said quietly, pouring himself a glass of luminescent wine. Ember rumbled, a sound that vibrated through the floor. Over the years, Valen had learned to interpret her vocalizations. This one meant disagreement. All right, perhaps hate is too strong. But they certainly don't trust me. He sank into a chair, suddenly feeling every bit of his inadequacy. What am I doing, Ember? I'm a healer, not a king. I know how to mend bones and cure diseases, not navigate political wars and galactic threats. The dragon moved closer, lowering her massive head until her golden eyes were level with his. In those depths, Valen saw something he desperately needed, belief. Ember believed in him even when he couldn't believe in himself. A soft chime interrupted the moment. Valen's communication device projected a hologram of his intelligence advisor, a young woman named Riley who had been instrumental in his rise to power. Your Majesty, we have a situation. The Crimson Dominion has sent an envoy. They're requesting an immediate audience. Valen's exhaustion evaporated, replaced by sharp alertness. At this hour? What's their stated purpose? Riley's expression was troubled. They didn't provide one. But our sensors detected 3 warships holding position just outside our territory. This feels like intimidation, not diplomacy. Tell them I'll meet their envoy in 1 hour. And Riley? Have Ember accompany me to the audience. Your Majesty, the traditionalists will say you're using the dragon as a crutch. I'm using the dragon as a statement, Valen interrupted. They want to intimidate? Let's show them what true strength looks like. As he prepared for the unexpected meeting, Valen couldn't ignore the sense that the pieces on the galactic game board were beginning to move. His decision to save Ember hadn't just changed his life, it had sent ripples through the cosmos, disturbing ancient patterns and awakening forces that had slumbered for eons. The crown on his head felt heavier than ever. But as Ember spread her wings in the moonlight streaming through the chamber windows, Valen allowed himself a moment of hope. Perhaps being an unconventional king wasn't a weakness. Perhaps it was exactly what the Starforged Empire needed to survive what was coming. Little did he know, the cosmic storm gathering on the horizon would test that hope in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The crown is heavy, especially when you're the alien king ruling a Starforged Empire on the brink. His unlikely ascent, forged in the ashes of a dragon's rescue, has now thrust him into a cosmic crucible of power struggles and rival empires. The Crimson Dominion's envoy was a creature of nightmares wrapped in diplomatic courtesy. Ambassador Kravik stood 7 feet tall, his crimson exoskeleton gleaming under the throne room's lights. 4 arms hung at his sides, each ending in razor-sharp talons that clicked impatiently against his ornate armor. His species, the Vexthar, had built their empire on conquest and viewed mercy as an evolutionary flaw to be eradicated. King Valen, Kravik's voice resonated like grinding metal. The Crimson Dominion extends its congratulations on your unexpected ascension. Valen sat on his throne with Ember coiled beside him, her presence drawing all of Kravik's secondary eyes. I sense there's more to this visit than congratulations, Ambassador. Perceptive. Kravik's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. My Empress wishes to understand the nature of your reign. Specifically, she is curious about your attachment to. He gestured dismissively at Ember. That creature. Ember is her name, Valen said coolly. And she is my closest advisor. The chamber, filled with council members and military officials, erupted in hushed whispers. Even now, months after his coronation, openly calling a dragon his advisor shocked the traditionalists. Kravik's laugh was a harsh sound. An advisor? My dear king, the creature cannot even speak. How does a mute beast offer counsel? Ember's growl reverberated through the stone floor. Valen felt her anger but also her restraint. She had learned patience during her long recovery, understanding that some battles were won through silence rather than fury. Communication takes many forms, ambassador. Perhaps in your empire, where strength is measured only in violence, you've forgotten that wisdom can exist without words. Kravik's expression darkened. Careful, young king. The Crimson Dominion has crushed civilizations for lesser insults. Then add me to your list, Valen replied, standing from his throne. But know this, the Starforged Empire will not be intimidated. Not by warships at our borders, not by veiled threats, and certainly not by those who mistake cruelty for strength. The tension in the room became suffocating. Commander Thane's hand moved subtly toward his weapon. High Chancellor Morvis looked pale, clearly calculating the political fallout of a diplomatic incident. But then something unexpected happened. Ember moved forward, placing herself between Valen and Kravik. Her movements were deliberate, non-threatening but undeniably powerful. She lowered her head, bringing her eyes level with the ambassador's central gaze. For a long moment they stared at each other, predator to predator, warrior to warrior. Finally, Kravik spoke and his tone had shifted. The Empress will be interested to hear about this. A king who stands behind his beliefs, even when faced with superior force. And a dragon who has conquered her own limitations to protect him. He turned back to Valen. Perhaps you are not as weak as we assumed. Was that a compliment, ambassador? An observation. The Crimson Dominion respects strength in all its forms. We simply had not seen yours yet. Kravik's forearms spread in a gesture that might have been a salute. My Empress offers you a proposition, a tournament of champions. Send your finest warrior to our arena world. If they prevail, we will grant you a trade agreement and open borders. If they fail. He smiled, showing rows of serrated teeth. Well, failure always has its price. After Kravik departed, the council exploded into argument. This is a trap. Lord Garrick roared. The Crimson Dominion's arenas are death traps. No one survives their tournaments. Then we refuse the offer, Morvis suggested. There's no shame in declining obvious bait. There's every shame in it, Commander Thane countered. If we refuse, we appear cowardly. The other empires will see it as weakness. Valen raised his hand for silence. We accept the tournament. But I will be the one to fight. The chamber erupted. Absolutely not. Riley pushed through the crowd. Your Majesty, you're a healer, not a gladiator. They'll slaughter you. Perhaps, Valen acknowledged. But consider the message it sends. A king who risks himself first, who doesn't hide behind his soldiers. That's not weakness, that's leadership. It's suicide, Morvis hissed. Your Majesty, I beg you to reconsider. Ember's roar cut through every voice. The dragon spread her wings to their full span, a display of recovered power that sent several council members stumbling backward. When silence returned, she folded her wings and looked at Valen with an expression he understood immediately. Ember will fight with me, Valen announced. The tournament allows bonded pairs. We trained together for 2 years. We know each other's movements, strengths, and limits. If anyone has a chance in that arena, it's us. Riley stepped forward, her eyes glistening. When did you become so reckless? The moment I chose to save a dying dragon instead of walking away. Valen smiled sadly. That decision set me on this path, Riley. There's no turning back now. In the weeks that followed, Valen prepared for the tournament while managing the daily chaos of his empire. Reports continued to flood in from the outer territories, ancient structures awakening, strange energy readings, and most disturbing of all, prophecies that had been dismissed as legend were suddenly being taken seriously by scholars across the galaxy. One night, Valen found himself in the Imperial Library, surrounded by texts thousands of years old. The head librarian, an elderly being named Elder Knox who had served 7 kings before him, guided him through the prophecies with trembling hands. Hear, your Majesty. The broken wing restored, the unlikely king enthroned. When mercy conquers tradition, the sleeper stirs beyond the rim. Knox's voice quivered. We always thought these were metaphors, poetic imagery from a more superstitious age. And now, Valen asked, studying the ancient script that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Now, I fear they were warnings. Nox pulled out another tome, this one so old it crumbled at the edges. The Sleeper is referenced in texts from all the ancient civilizations. The Crimson Dominion called it the Devourer. The Void Collective named it the Silence. The Eternal Synthesis believed it was their god. But all agreed on one thing: it should never be awakened. A chill ran down Valen's spine. What awakens it? Change. Disruption of the cosmic order. The rise of something new when the old ways still have power. Nox looked at him with frightened eyes. Your Majesty, by saving Ember, by taking the throne, by challenging every tradition the Starforged Empire was built upon, you may have done exactly what the prophecies warned against. Valen left the library as dawn broke over the Imperial spire, his mind reeling. Could it be true? Had his act of compassion set events in motion that could endanger not just his empire, but the entire galaxy? Ember found him on the training grounds, where he had gone to clear his head through physical exercise. She watched as he practiced combat forms, her golden eyes tracking every movement. Do you ever regret it? Valen asked between breaths, striking the training dummy with renewed fury. If you had known that me healing you would lead to all of this, the revolution, the coronation, the prophecies, would you have let me walk away? Ember responded by joining him in the training circle. Over the next hour, they sparred together, her claws carefully controlled, his movements becoming fluid as muscle memory took over. This was their language, not words but shared purpose, mutual trust, and an understanding that transcended speech. When they finished, both exhausted, Valen finally felt clarity returning. Whether the prophecies are real or not, whether we awaken something terrible or not, we can only move forward. We accept the tournament, we face whatever comes, and we prove that compassion and strength are not opposites. Riley interrupted with urgent news. Your Majesty, we've received responses from the other empires regarding your acceptance of the Crimson Dominion's challenge. The Void Collective is intrigued. They've sent observers. But the Eternal Synthesis. She paused, her expression grave. They've declared you a heretic. They claim that your bond with Ember violates the natural order, that you are the breaker mentioned in their religious texts. The breaker? Someone who shatters the cosmic balance. They believe that balance must be maintained at all costs, even if it means. Riley couldn't finish the sentence. Even if it means destroying me, Valen completed. Well, that's just perfect. I'm not just fighting in a tournament now, I'm fighting for legitimacy, for my empire's future, and apparently, to prove I'm not some cosmic villain. As the ship prepared to depart for the tournament world, Valen stood once more on the crystal balcony watching the stars. Ember joined him, her presence solid and reassuring. Every decision we make creates ripples, Valen said softly. I chose to save you, and those ripples have become waves. Now those waves are crashing against empires, awakening ancient forces, and challenging the very foundation of how this galaxy operates. He turned to look at his companion, his friend, his symbol of everything he believed in. I don't regret it, Ember. Not for a moment. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Just like we always have. The dragon's rumble of agreement vibrated through the stone, and for the first time in weeks, Valen felt truly ready for what lay ahead. The tournament would be dangerous, the prophecies terrifying, and the political consequences potentially devastating. But he was no longer the uncertain healer who stumbled onto a throne. He was King Valen of the Starforged Empire, and he would prove that mercy, compassion, and unconventional choices could reshape the cosmos, not through domination but through the courage to believe in something better. The ship's engines roared to life beneath them. The tournament awaited, and with it, the next chapter in a story that was becoming far larger than anyone could have predicted. You thought you knew the Alien King's story, but the true epic has just begun. Beyond the disabled dragon, beyond his shocking ascension, lies a labyrinth of galactic politics and cosmic secrets. The tournament world of Crothvel hung like a blood-red jewel against the void of space. It was a moon that the Crimson Dominion had hollowed out and transformed into the galaxy's deadliest arena. As Valen's ship descended through the atmosphere of scorched rock and volcanic ash, he could see the massive Colosseum that dominated the landscape, a structure built from the bones of defeated empires, its walls inscribed with the names of thousands of fallen warriors. Cheerful place, Riley muttered, studying the scans from her station. Sensors are picking up massive energy signatures throughout the structure. Whatever they use for their arena defenses, it's nothing I've seen before. Commander Thane stood at attention, his expression grim. Your Majesty, it's not too late to send a replacement. I've trained my entire life for combat. Let me take your place. Valen shook his head, his hand resting on Ember's neck. The dragon was tense, her scales rippling with barely contained energy. She could sense the danger that permeated this world. We've been over this, Commander. This needs to be me. The landing platform was crowded with representatives from across the galaxy. Valen recognized the insignias of dozens of civilizations, some allied with the Starforged Empire, others neutral, and many openly hostile. All had come to witness whether the unconventional new king would survive or become another name on Crothvel's walls. But it was the three primary groups that drew Valen's attention. The Crimson Dominion's delegation stood to the right, led by Empress Vectara herself. She was even more imposing than her ambassador, her exoskeleton a deeper shade of red, almost black, and her 6 eyes burning with intelligence and barely contained violence. Her warriors surrounded her, each one a proven killer who had survived countless battles. To the left, the representatives of the Void Collective floated rather than stood. They were beings of shadow and starlight, their forms constantly shifting as if they existed partially outside normal reality. No one knew much about the Void Collective. They were isolationists who rarely interacted with other empires. That they had sent observers at all was unprecedented. But it was the center group that made Valen's blood run cold. The Eternal Synthesis had sent their High Inquisitor, a figure called the Arbiter, who claimed to speak with the voice of the universe itself. The Arbiter wore robes that seemed woven from light and shadow, and their face was hidden behind a mask that reflected whoever looked upon it. Surrounding them were warrior priests, each one radiating an aura of absolute conviction. King Valen. The Arbiter's voice was neither male nor female, but something beyond. You stand accused of heresy, of breaking the cosmic order, of awakening that which should remain dormant. Valen stepped forward, Ember at his side. I stand accused of showing mercy to a suffering creature. If that's heresy, then every compassionate being in this galaxy is guilty. Compassion has its place, the Arbiter replied. But when it disrupts the balance, when it awakens the sleeper, it becomes a threat to all existence. You should have let the dragon die. Its survival has set events in motion that cannot be undone. Empress Vectara's laugh cut through the tension. Enough philosophy, Arbiter. We're here to see if this young king can fight, not to debate theology. She turned her 6-eyed gaze on Valen. Welcome to Crothvel, King Valen. I trust you understand the rules? Single combat, no weapons except what you and your bonded creature bring naturally. Fight until surrender or death. There are no ties, no honorable withdrawals. You win or you die. Understood, Valen replied, his voice steadier than he felt. Good. Because your opponent has been chosen. Vectara gestured toward the arena entrance. Meet Champion Rasker, undefeated in 300 battles. He has personally requested the honor of facing you. The figure that emerged from the shadows was a walking nightmare. Rasker stood at least 8 feet tall, his body a patchwork of cybernetic enhancements and natural armor. One arm ended in a massive blade that seemed to absorb light. The other had been replaced with a cannon that hummed with barely contained energy. But it was his eyes that truly disturbed Valen. They held no life, no personality, only the cold calculation of a killing machine that had long ago forgotten what it meant to be anything else. He volunteered? Valen asked quietly. Begged actually, Vectara replied. Rasker believes that defeating you will secure his place in our empire's history. The warrior who ended the heretic king's reign before it truly began. The next hours were a blur of preparation. Valen was given quarters beneath the arena, where he and Ember could ready themselves for the coming battle. Riley stayed with him, running through strategies while doing her best to hide her fear. His right side is slightly slower, she analyzed, projecting holographic recordings of Rasker's previous fights. The cybernetic enhancements are powerful but not perfect. If you can exploit that weakness. Riley. Valen placed his hand over hers, stopping the projection. We both know I'm not going to win this through superior technique. Rasker has centuries of combat experience. I have determination and a dragon who refuses to let me give up. Then what's your plan? Valen looked at Ember, who watched him with those impossibly wise eyes. We fight the way we've always fought. Not to dominate, not to destroy, but to understand. To find the solution that others can't see because they're too focused on traditional methods. A knock interrupted them. Commander Thane entered, his face grave. Your Majesty, I bring news from home. While you've been preparing, the Eternal Synthesis has declared formal sanctions against the Starforged Empire. They've closed their borders and are calling for other empires to isolate us until you're removed from power. Valen closed his eyes, feeling the weight of yet another crisis. They're trying to make me a pariah. Force the other empires to choose between trading with them or recognizing my legitimacy. It's worse than that. Thane's voice dropped. High Chancellor Morvis has sent a private message. He's asking if you've considered stepping down. For the good of the Empire. The betrayal stung, though Valen supposed he should have expected it. Morvis had never truly accepted him as king. Tell the High Chancellor that I will address his concerns when I return. Assuming I return. Your Majesty. I know, Commander. I know the odds. But running now would prove everything my enemies say about me. That I'm weak, that I'm unfit, that my compassion is a fatal flaw. He stood, moving to where Ember rested. Sometimes the only way forward is through the fire. The arena was a cacophony of sound when Valen finally entered. Thousands of beings from across the galaxy filled the stands, their voices creating a wall of noise that pressed down like physical weight. The fighting floor was a circle of dark stone, surrounded by energy barriers that shimmered with lethal promise. Anyone who tried to flee would be instantly vaporized. Rasker waited in the center, his blade arm reflecting the harsh lights. He didn't move, didn't gesture, simply stood like a statue of death itself. Valen walked forward with Ember at his side. Every step felt like marching toward his own grave, but he kept his head high, his expression calm. He had chosen this path. Now he would see it through. Citizens of the galaxy. Empress Vectara's voice boomed across the arena. Today we witness a test of belief against experience, compassion against conquest, the old ways against the new. King Valen of the Starforged Empire has accepted our challenge. Now he must prove himself worthy of the crown he wears. The crowd roared its approval, a sound like thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the arena. Combatants, prepare. Vectara raised her primary claw. The battle begins, now. The claw fell. Rasker moved with terrifying speed, his blade arm cutting through the air where Valen's head had been a fraction of a second before. Only Ember's warning growl had given him enough time to dodge. The dragon countered with a blast of flame, but Rasker's armor absorbed it without damage. The first minute was pure survival. Valen danced and dodged, using every bit of agility he possessed to stay ahead of Rasker's attacks. Ember provided cover, her claws striking from unexpected angles, her tail sweeping low to try to knock the champion off balance. But Rasker was relentless, his movements precise and brutal. Is this the best the Starforged Empire can offer? Rasker's voice was cold, mechanical. A healer pretending to be a warrior? You're an insult to every fighter who died in this arena. Valen didn't respond, focusing instead on observation. He watched how Rasker moved, how he telegraphed his attacks, where his cybernetic enhancements connected to his organic parts. Riley had been right, there was a slight delay on the right side, a fraction of a second where the mechanical systems had to communicate with biological nerves. But knowing a weakness and exploiting it were entirely different things. Rasker's energy cannon fired, and Valen barely got Ember's wing between himself and the blast. The impact sent them both sprawling. Valen tasted blood, felt ribs that might be cracked. Ember roared in pain, her wings singed by the energy discharge. The crowd screamed for blood. Rasker approached slowly, savoring his victory. I expected more. The dragon who conquered death itself, the king who defied tradition. But you're just another fool who thought compassion was strength. Let me show you what real strength looks like. He raised his blade for the killing blow. And Valen saw it, the opening he'd been searching for. In Rasker's confidence, in his certainty of victory, he had dropped his guard ever so slightly. The cybernetic enhancements that made him powerful also made him predictable. He had fought so many battles the same way that he no longer knew how to adapt. Ember. Valen shouted. Phoenix formation. They had practiced this maneuver 1,000 times during Ember's recovery. It required perfect timing, absolute trust, and a willingness to risk everything on a single moment. Ember surged forward, not at Rasker, but beneath him. Her damaged wings swept low, and Valen used her rising back as a platform, launching himself upward and over Rasker's blade. For a heartbeat, he hung in the air, completely vulnerable. Then he landed on Rasker's shoulders, his hands finding the neural connection points where cybernetic met organic. As a healer, Valen knew anatomy, knew exactly where to press to send the nervous system into shock. Rasker roared, his systems going haywire. The blade arm swung wildly, the energy cannon fired in random directions. Valen held on for dear life, maintaining pressure on the neural points while Ember wrapped herself around Rasker's legs, tripping the massive warrior. They crashed to the ground together, and Valen rolled clear just as Ember pinned Rasker's blade arm with her weight. The champion struggled, but his systems were still rebooting, his organic parts unable to compensate for the neural disruption. Valen stood over him, breathing hard, every part of his body screaming in pain. He could end it now, could deliver the finishing blow that tradition demanded. The crowd wanted blood, wanted to see the champion fall. Instead, Valen extended his hand. Yield, please. You've proven your worth 1,000 times over. You don't need to die here. Rasker stared at the offered hand, his expression unreadable. The arena fell silent, everyone waiting to see what the champion would do. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Rasker's hand moved, not to strike but to grasp Valen's extended palm. I yield. The words echoed across the stunned arena. Empress Vectara stood, her 6 eyes wide with something that might have been respect. The tournament is concluded. King Valen of the Star-Forged Empire stands victorious. But before the celebration could begin, the sky above Crothvel tore open. It started as a ripple, a distortion in the fabric of space itself. Then darkness poured through, not the darkness of night but something deeper, more profound. An absence so complete that it seemed to devour even the concept of light. The Void Collective's observers suddenly went rigid, their shifting forms freezing in place. When they spoke, their voices harmonized in terror. The sleeper wakes. The prophecy unfolds. The balance is broken. The arbiter of the eternal synthesis pointed an accusatory finger at Valen. You did this. Your heresy has awakened the devourer. The universe itself rejects your disruption of the natural order. But Valen barely heard them. He stared at the tear in reality, watching as something vast and incomprehensible stirred in the darkness beyond. Ember pressed against him, her scales glowing with an inner light that pushed back against the spreading shadow. And in that moment, Valen understood. The prophecies were real. The sleeper was awake. And every choice he had made, every tradition he had broken, every act of compassion that defied conventional wisdom, it had all led to this moment. The galaxy would never be the same. The question was whether it would survive what came next. The darkness that poured from the rift above Crothvel was unlike anything the gathered empires had witnessed. It moved with purpose, tendrils of absolute void reaching down toward the arena like fingers testing the boundaries between realities. Where the darkness touched, matter simply ceased to exist, not destroyed but unmade, as if the universe itself forgot those things had ever been. Valen stood frozen, his hand still clasping Rasker's in a grip that had become desperate rather than congratulatory. Ember's glow intensified, her scales radiating light that seemed to be the only thing holding the darkness at bay, at least in their immediate vicinity. Everyone to the ships. Empress Vectara's command cut through the rising panic. Her warriors moved with military precision, but even their discipline couldn't completely hide their fear. This world is lost. But the arbiter of the eternal synthesis didn't move. They stood with arms raised, their reflective mask now showing only darkness, as if even reflections couldn't survive near the rift. Lost? No, Empress. This is destiny. This is the consequence of breaking cosmic law. They turned to face Valen, and their voice boomed across the arena, amplified by powers Valen couldn't comprehend. Behold the devourer. The silence. The end of all things. It slumbered for 10 million years, kept dormant by the balance of the cosmos. But you, King Valen, you shattered that balance. Your mercy was entropy. Your compassion was chaos. And now the universe pays the price. Valen wanted to respond, to defend himself, but he couldn't tear his eyes from the rift. Something was moving in that darkness, something so vast that his mind struggled to process its scale. It wasn't a creature in any conventional sense, it was more like a fundamental force given terrible consciousness, aware and hungry and ancient beyond measure. Riley's voice crackled through his communicator, desperate and tinny against the groaning of reality itself. Your Majesty, get to the ship. The entire moon is destabilizing. The prophecies. Elder Knox's voice joined hers, the old librarian having insisted on monitoring from the ship. Your Majesty, I've been cross-referencing the ancient texts. The sleeper wasn't sealed away by force, it was kept dormant by cosmic stasis, by an order so rigid and unchanging that it had nothing to consume. Change is what feeds it, evolution is what gives it strength. Valen's mind raced. So by changing the empire, by disrupting tradition. You rang the dinner bell, Knox finished grimly. Every empire in this galaxy has maintained their ways for millennia because change meant risk. The Crimson Dominion's conquest, the Void Collective's isolation, the Eternal Synthesis's religious rigidity, They weren't just traditions, they were cosmic anchors. And you loosened the most important one by healing Ember, by proving that change and growth were possible. The Void Collective's observers suddenly spoke in unison, their harmonized voices carrying a strange mixture of terror and fascination. We dwell in the spaces between realities. We have watched the sleeper since our civilization's birth. It is not evil, evil requires choice. It simply exists to consume change, to restore stasis, to return the universe to its original static perfection. It is the cosmic immune system rejecting evolution itself. One of the observers broke formation, drifting toward Valen. You interest us, King Valen. You and your dragon represent the greatest change in 10,000 years. The sleeper will consume you first, will unmake every difference you've created. But perhaps. The observer's form shimmered with something that might have been hope. Perhaps in consumption, there is understanding. Before Valen could ask what that meant, the ground beneath them cracked. Not physically, the stone remained solid. But reality itself fractured, showing glimpses of the void beneath the material world. Beings throughout the arena began to disappear, not dying but simply ceasing to be, erased from existence so completely that those still present couldn't remember who had vanished. We're losing people. Commander Thane's voice was raw with horror. Your Majesty, entire sections of the crowd are just gone. And no one can remember their faces, their names, anything. Rasker pulled Valen toward the exit, his cybernetic strength making resistance impossible. Move, Healer King. This is beyond any of us. But Ember didn't move. The dragon planted herself firmly in the center of the arena, her wings spread wide, her entire body blazing with light that pushed back the darkness. She roared, not a challenge but a call, a sound that resonated with something deep in the rift itself. And impossibly the darkness responded. The tendrils paused, their advance halting as if considering this small, bright creature who dared to face them. Valen understood. Ember wasn't attacking, she was communicating. Everyone stop. Don't flee, don't fight. That's what it expects, what every civilization has always done when faced with the unknown. Have you lost your mind? Vectara snarled, but her warriors had already frozen, responding to the authority in Valen's voice despite their empress's objection. Valen approached Ember, placing his hand on her scales. Through their bond, he could feel what she sensed. The sleeper wasn't mindless hunger. It was ancient consciousness, so old that it remembered the universe before life, before complexity, before anything changed. And change hurt it, like light hurts eyes adjusted to darkness. The prophecies talk about the sleeper, Valen said, his voice carrying across the arena through speakers that were somehow still functioning. But they also mentioned the breaker, the healer, the unlikely king. Everyone assumed those were warnings, descriptions of who would bring doom. What if they were instructions? The arbiter's laugh was bitter. Instructions? To do what, heretic? Apologize to entropy? Ask the devourer politely to go back to sleep? To heal it, Valen said simply. That's what I do. I heal things everyone else has given up on. Ember was supposed to die, I healed her. My empire was rotting from within, I'm healing it. So why not this? He walked toward the rift, and Ember matched him step for step. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to flee with the others, to choose survival over this insane gambit. But the prophecies hadn't been wrong about everything else. Maybe, just maybe, they were right about this too. The Void Collective observers converged around him, their forms creating a barrier of shifting shadows. We will guide you to the threshold. We exist partially in the void, we can survive there longer than most. But King Valen, understand, what you attempt has never been done. The sleeper has consumed entire civilizations that tried to communicate with it. Then we'll be the first to succeed, Valen replied with more confidence than he felt. Elder Nox, I need you to read me the complete prophecy. Every word, even the parts that seem like nonsense. Nox's voice trembled but remained clear. The broken wing restored, the unlikely king enthroned. When mercy conquers tradition, the sleeper stirs beyond the rim. But the healer comes not with chains, not with war, not with the surrender of progress. The healer comes with understanding, with the light of change tempered by the wisdom of stillness. Two become one, motion and rest, and the cosmos learns to breathe again. Two become one, Valen repeated, looking at Ember. Motion and rest. Change and stasis. We don't fight the sleeper and we don't surrender to it. We have to show it that change and stability can coexist. He reached the edge of the rift, where the barrier between reality and void grew thin. The darkness was close enough to touch, so close he could feel his own existence wavering. Ember pressed against him, her light flaring brighter. And then Valen did something that would be remembered, or forgotten, forever, depending on whether the universe survived the next few minutes. He extended his hand into the void, not as a weapon, not as surrender, but as an offering. A physician's touch, seeking to diagnose before prescribing treatment. The darkness recoiled at first, and used to being approached without fear or hostility. Then, slowly, cautiously, it flowed around his hand. Valen gasped as alien consciousness touched his own, not a mind in any recognizable sense, but something vast and lonely and confused. The sleeper didn't want to destroy. It wanted everything to stop changing because change was pain, was chaos, was the slow erosion of the perfect order it remembered from the universe's birth. Every new life, every evolution, every empire that rose and fell, all of it was noise and confusion to a being that existed before time itself began moving forward. But through Ember's light, through their bond, Valen showed the sleeper something it had never considered. That change didn't have to mean chaos. That growth could be deliberate. That the universe could evolve while still maintaining essential truths, essential connections. He showed it Ember's recovery, how patience and care had restored her while honoring what she had always been. He showed it his empire's transformation, how they were becoming something new while remembering the lessons of the past. He showed it the bond between king and dragon, how two beings from different worlds could complement each other, motion and stillness working in harmony. The darkness around his hand began to warm. Not temperature but something deeper, understanding perhaps, or at least curiosity. The sleeper had consumed change for so long that it had forgotten change could be beautiful, could be healing, could be growth rather than destruction. But then something went wrong. The darkness suddenly surged, overwhelming Valen's consciousness. He was drowning in void, in the terrible weight of billions of years of isolation and fear. The sleeper didn't know how to accept what he offered. It only knew consumption, only knew how to unmake. Valen felt himself beginning to unravel, his existence separating into component pieces that the void could more easily digest. He tried to scream but no sound emerged. He was dying, not physically but metaphysically, being erased from the universe itself. Ember's roar shattered the silence. The dragon's light exploded outward, a nova of pure will and defiance that carved through the darkness like a blade. But she wasn't attacking, she was amplifying. Taking Valen's message and broadcasting it with a power that he alone couldn't muster. The void collective observers joined her, their forms merging with her light. "We understand now," they said in unison. "We who dwell in between can be the bridge. We can translate." Across the arena, something unprecedented happened. The Crimson Dominion's warriors began to hum, a war song that spoke of honoring fallen enemies. The Eternal Synthesis priests chanted prayers for redemption rather than destruction. Even the scattered audience members who remained joined in, each species adding their voice to a chorus that transcended language. They were showing the sleeper what civilization meant. Not stasis and not chaos, but the eternal dance between order and change, tradition and innovation, rest and motion. Every empire, every being, every moment of growth and preservation working together in cosmic harmony. The darkness hesitated, pulled back, reconsidered. And slowly, impossibly, it began to retreat into the rift. Not in defeat but in something like understanding. The sleeper was learning that it didn't have to consume change to survive. It could exist alongside evolution, could be the necessary pause that made motion meaningful. As the last tendrils withdrew, Valen collapsed. Ember caught him, her wings wrapping around his barely conscious form. The rift sealed itself, reality stitching closed like a wound finally allowed to heal. Silence fell across Crothvel, broken only by Valen's ragged breathing. The arbiter of the eternal synthesis spoke first, their voice subdued. The prophecies were not warnings. They were invitations. Instructions for a healing we thought impossible. They removed their reflective mask, revealing a face that cycled through countless species, constantly changing. We who preach unchanging order have been the greatest hypocrites of all. We change with every generation, every breath. We simply pretended otherwise. Empress Vectara approached Valen, her 6 eyes gleaming with something like reverence. "You did not defeat the sleeper, Healer King. You taught it. Taught it and us that strength comes in forms we had forgotten to recognize." Rasker knelt beside them. "I have fought for 3 centuries. Won 300 battles. But today I learned that the greatest victory is the one that requires no casualties. I ask permission to join your service, King Valen. To learn this new way of strength." As consciousness slowly returned, Valen heard Riley's voice in his communicator, choked with tears. "You did it. I don't understand how, but you did it." The entire galaxy watched you face the Devourer with nothing but compassion and a dragon's light. Do you have any idea what you've just accomplished? Valen tried to respond but couldn't find words. He had faced cosmic horror and survived not through strength or cunning, but through the simple belief that healing was always possible, that connection was stronger than isolation, that change and stability could dance together rather than war eternally. The galaxy would have questions. The prophecies had more to reveal. And the sleeper, though returned to its rest, would need continued understanding lest it wake again. But in that moment, as Ember's warmth surrounded him and the representatives of three empires looked upon him with new eyes, Valen allowed himself to hope. Perhaps his unlikely reign could indeed reshape the cosmos. The true work was only beginning. 3 weeks after the events on Crothvel, the Imperial Spire had transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. Representatives from all three rival empires now walked its halls, their presence a testament to how dramatically the balance of power had shifted. The throne room, once a place of isolation and intimidation, had become a center for dialogue that spanned civilizations. Valen stood before a gathered assembly unlike any the galaxy had witnessed. Empress Vectara of the Crimson Dominion sat to his right, her warriors positioned respectfully rather than threateningly. The Void Collective's observers hovered to his left, their shifting forms somehow more solid, more present than they'd been before. Even the Arbiter of the Eternal Synthesis had returned, their mask permanently removed to reveal the ever-changing face beneath. And everywhere, in alcoves perched on balconies coiled near doorways, dragons had begun to appear. Word of Ember's role in calming the sleeper had spread, and dragons that had been hidden away, considered too old or too injured for traditional service, were emerging from corners of the Empire where they'd been forgotten. Each one represented a choice, to honor tradition that discarded the broken, or to embrace healing that valued all life. The Galactic Accord, Valen began, his voice carrying through the chamber with new authority, represents a fundamental shift in how we understand power. For millennia, each empire operated under the assumption that strength meant domination, that survival required the suppression of change. The Sleeper's awakening proved that assumption false. High Chancellor Morvis, who had been conspicuously silent since Valen's return, finally spoke. Your Majesty, I must confess my doubts about your reign were misplaced. But the Council requires clarification. What exactly are you proposing? Riley stepped forward, projecting holographic documents that had taken weeks to draft. The Accord establishes 3 principles. First, controlled evolution. Each empire commits to manage change rather than rigid stasis or chaotic upheaval. We grow deliberately, learning from each other while maintaining our cultural identities. Second, the Arbiter added, their voice no longer accusatory but collaborative, mutual vulnerability. We acknowledge that no empire is perfect, that asking for help is not weakness. The Eternal Synthesis will open our borders and share our religious texts with scholars from all civilizations. What we thought was divine mandate was often simply fear dressed in holy language. Empress Vectara's laugh was sharp but not unkind. And third, which pains my warrior's heart to admit, compassionate strength. The Crimson Dominion will reform its arena traditions. Combat will still test prowess, but victory will be measured in skill and restraint rather than death. Rasker has already begun training a new generation of warriors in these methods. The champion himself stood near Ember, his cybernetic enhancements now modified to include systems for healing as well as harm. He had become Valen's personal guard, a living symbol of how even the most hardened warrior could learn new purposes. A Void Collective observer drifted forward. We who exist between realities have served as bridges for this accord. Our isolation was self-imposed fear, terror that connection would make us vulnerable. But we saw King Valen and his dragon show that vulnerability partnered with trust creates bonds stronger than any armor. We will establish embassies, will teach others to perceive the spaces between, will help all civilizations understand that in-between places are not empty, they're full of possibility. Commander Thane raised a concern that had been whispered throughout the military ranks. This all sounds ideal, but how do we enforce such an accord? What happens when an empire violates these principles? Who has authority to intervene? No one, Valen answered, and the room erupted in surprised murmurs. He raised his hand for silence. That's the point, Commander. The old ways relied on threats and punishment, on empires policing each other through violence and sanctions. The Accord relies on something more revolutionary, trust, monitored transparency, and the collective understanding that we all benefit from stability. That's madness, Lord Garrick protested. Without enforcement, without consequences. There are consequences, the Arbiter interrupted. Just not the ones you're accustomed to. Any empire that breaks the accord will face isolation not through military blockade, but through the simple fact that the others will continue to prosper through cooperation while they stagnate. The Sleeper taught us that the universe itself rejects pure stasis, but it also rejects chaos. The accord is our attempt to find the rhythm between those extremes. Elder Knox shuffled forward, his ancient frame somehow seeming stronger since their return. If I may, Your Majesty, I've discovered something in the prophecies that relates directly to this discussion. He projected an ancient text, its symbols glowing faintly. The verses we thought ended with the sleeper's calming actually continue, and when the cosmos learns to breathe, the healer's reign becomes the question. Not if change should come, but how to guide it. Not if empires should unite, but why they choose separation. The unlikely king asks what all rulers forget. What kind of galaxy do we wish our children to inherit? The chamber fell silent, each representative contemplating that question. What kind of galaxy indeed? Valen walked to where Ember rested, placing his hand on her scales in a gesture that had become second nature. I didn't choose to be king. I chose to save a dying dragon because walking away felt wrong. That choice led to revolution, to coronation, to facing cosmic horror. But every step of that journey was driven by a simple question. Could things be better? Not perfect, not ideal, but better than they were. He turned to face the assembly. The Galactic Accord asked that same question. Can we be better? Can we choose cooperation over conquest? Can we value healing as much as we value strength? Can we accept that change is inevitable and choose to guide it rather than fear it? Empress Vectara stood, her imposing form seeming less threatening and more thoughtful. My empire was built on the belief that only the strong deserve to exist. But I watched a healer and a dragon face the devourer with nothing but light and compassion. That is a strength I never imagined possible. The Crimson Dominion signs the accord. The Arbiter followed. The Eternal Synthesis has spent 10,000 years preaching the perfection of unchanging order. We were wrong. We became so obsessed with preserving what was that we forgot to ask what could be. We signed the accord. The Void Collective's observers spoke in unison. We who dwell in shadows choose to step into light. We signed the accord. One by one, representatives from dozens of smaller civilizations came forward, each adding their mark to the holographic document. Some moved with enthusiasm, others with caution, but all with the understanding that they were witnessing and creating history. High Chancellor Morvis approached last, and Valen could see the struggle in his eyes. Here was a man who had served under the old regime, who had built his entire identity on tradition and established order. The accord represented everything he'd spent his life resisting. Your Majesty, Morvis began, his voice thick with emotion. I questioned your every decision. I doubted your capability, your methods, your right to rule. I even suggested you step down for the good of the Empire. He paused, seeming to gather strength. I was wrong. Not because your methods succeeded, but because I finally understand what you've been trying to teach us. Power isn't about making people do what you want, it's about helping them become what they can be. He bowed, a gesture of genuine respect. The Star-Forged Empire signs the accord. And this old counselor asks permission to learn new ways. As celebrations erupted throughout the chamber, Valen felt Ember's rumble of satisfaction vibrating through the floor. They had done it, not through conquest or intimidation, but through the stubborn belief that compassion could reshape reality itself. But Riley pulled him aside, her expression troubled despite the victory. Your Majesty, we've received strange reports from the outer territories. The same places where ancient structures awakened when you healed Ember are now singing. Singing? That's what the survey teams call it. Harmonic frequencies that seem to resonate with Ember's light signature. Elder Knox thinks they might be responding to the accord, that the galaxy itself is acknowledging the shift in cosmic balance. She hesitated. But there's something else. The sleeper didn't fully return to dormancy. Still where? Watching. Some of the Void Collective's deep void sensors are picking up what they describe as curious observation, rather than hungry attention. Valen considered this, watching Ember interact with a newly emerged dragon, teaching it exercises that would strengthen wings weakened by years of disuse. Perhaps that's not a threat. Perhaps the sleeper is learning just as we are. Learning that change doesn't have to mean its end, that evolution can be gentle as well as violent. That's optimistic. I'm a healer. Optimism is an occupational requirement. He smiled, but it faded as he glimpsed something through the chamber's massive windows. The nebula that had always painted the sky was different now. Its colors shifted in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, almost responsive. The galaxy was changing. The Accord would face challenges, would require constant nurturing and adaptation. There would be setbacks, betrayals, moments when the old ways would seem safer than the uncertain path forward. But looking at the assembled representatives, at the dragons emerging from hiding, at the simple fact that traditional enemies now shared wine and stories in his throne room, Valen felt something he hadn't experienced since before Ember's injury, hope that was untainted by fear. "Your Majesty," Rasker approached, his mechanical systems whirring softly. "The warrior trainees are ready for your inspection. They wish to demonstrate the new combat forms, the ones that emphasize protection over destruction. Tell them I'll be there shortly." Valen watched the celebration continue, feeling the weight of his crown but also its purpose. He had reshaped galactic politics through an act of mercy toward a disabled dragon. What came next would determine whether that reshaping lasted or crumbled under the pressure of ingrained traditions. But that was a challenge for tomorrow. Tonight, the galaxy celebrated a possibility it had forgotten existed, that different civilizations could choose cooperation, that ancient enemies could become allies, that change could be guided rather than feared. The unlikely king had done the impossible. Now came the harder part, proving it could last. The story of King Valen and Ember the Dragon was far from over. In many ways it was only truly beginning. 4 months after the Galactic Accord signing, cracks began to show in the foundation of the new order. It started small, delayed responses to diplomatic messages, increased military patrols near border regions, whispers of dissatisfaction from traditionalist factions within each empire. But like water seeping through stone, these small fractures hinted at deeper instabilities waiting to split the fragile piece apart. Valen stood in the intelligence center, a facility that had quadrupled in size since his reign began. Holographic displays surrounded him, each showing different trouble spots across the galaxy. Riley moved between them with practiced efficiency, highlighting the most concerning developments. "The Crimson Dominion's outer colonies are showing signs of unrest," she reported, pulling up data feeds. "Local warlords are refusing to implement the Accord's principles. They say Empress Vectara has grown soft, that true warriors don't need compassion to be strong." Commander Thane added his observations. "It's worse in the Eternal Synthesis territories. 3 entire worlds have declared themselves traditional synthesis states, rejecting the Arbiter's reforms. They claim the old prophecies were correct and that the Arbiter has been deceived by heretical influences." "Meaning me," Valen said quietly. He'd expected resistance, but the speed and coordination of these rebellions troubled him. And the Void Collective? The display shifted to show vast regions of space that seemed to distort sensor readings. "That's the strangest part," Riley answered. "Entire sections of their territory have gone dark. Not hostile, not destroyed, just silent. Like they've withdrawn even further than before." A Void Collective observer materialized in the room, their form flickering with what might have been distress. "We bring warning, King Valen. There are those among our people who believe the Accord was a mistake, that connection has made us vulnerable to the very threats we spent millennia avoiding. They have retreated to the deep void, to places where reality itself grows thin. We fear they may be attempting to contact the sleeper directly, to negotiate their own arrangement." The implications chilled Valen to his core. Can they wake it again? Not wake perhaps, but redirect its attention. The sleeper is still learning to coexist with change. If shown that change brings only conflict and division, it may decide that returning the galaxy to stasis is the compassionate choice. Ember growled from her position near the window, her scales rippling with agitation. Through their bond, Valen felt her concern, not for their safety but for the dream they'd fought so hard to create. The Accord was supposed to prove that different ways of life could coexist, that mercy and strength weren't opposites. If it crumbled, what message did that send? Elder Knox entered, looking frielier than usual. "Your Majesty, I've been studying the prophecies again, specifically the verses that come after the sleeper's calming. I believe I've found something critical." He projected ancient text that seemed to pulse with its own light. The question becomes the answer, but only when the healer walks where healers fear. Beyond the rim of reason, past the edge of known, where the forgotten things remember what they were. There the unlikely king must choose, to preserve the peace by force, or risk all by trusting those who trust in nothing. "That's remarkably unhelpful," Thane muttered. "Prophetic nonsense." "No," Valen said, studying the words. "It's a warning about what comes next. The Accord isn't failing because people don't understand it. It's failing because implementing it requires facing our deepest fears. The fear that cooperation will be exploited, that vulnerability will be punished, that showing mercy means accepting weakness. He turned to the assembled group. We need to address these rebellions but not through military force. That would prove the traditionalists right, would show that the Accord only works when enforced by violence. We need another approach. Such as? Riley asked, though her expression suggested she already suspected his answer. I need to visit these rebel territories personally. Not as a conqueror, not even as a king, but as the healer who started all this. I need to understand why they're resisting, what fears drive their rejection of the Accord. The room erupted in protest. Absolutely not. Thane's voice cut through the chaos. Your Majesty, those territories are hostile. They've already declared you a heretic, a disruptor, a threat to everything they hold sacred. Walking into their midst would be suicide. Or it would be the ultimate demonstration of the Accord's principles, Valen countered. Trust. Vulnerability. The belief that understanding can bridge even the deepest divides. Rasker, who had been silently observing, stepped forward. If the king goes, I go. I was once the galaxy's most feared warrior. Now I serve a healer. Let me show these rebels what true strength looks like. Empress Vectara's hologram flickered into existence, her 6 eyes blazing. I've been monitoring your discussion. King Valen, this is madness even by your standards. My own warlords have price bounties on your head. They blame you personally for what they see as my empire's weakness. Then help me understand their perspective, Valen pleaded. Your Majesty, you've ruled longer than I've been alive. You know these warlords know what drives them. Is it really just hatred of change, or is there something deeper? Vectara's expression softened marginally. Fear mostly. The Crimson Dominion was built on clear hierarchies, on the understanding that strength determines survival. The Accord asks them to value things they've been taught are weaknesses: cooperation, mercy, patience. They're not evil, young king. They're terrified that everything they know, everything that's kept them alive, will be taken away. Then I need to show them that the Accord doesn't take away their strength, it adds to it. Valen made his decision. I'm going to visit the rebel territories. All of them. The Dominion's warlords, the Synthesis's traditionalists, and the Void Collective's isolationists. I'll go unarmed, accompanied only by Ember and anyone brave enough to join us. And I'll listen to their concerns, their fears, their objections. And if they kill you? Morvis asked bluntly. If they decide that murdering you is the simplest way to end the Accord? Then they'll prove that I was wrong about the galaxy's capacity for change. But at least they'll have to face the consequences of that choice directly, rather than hiding behind rhetoric and rebellion. The Arbiter's hologram materialized next to Vectara's. The prophecy speaks of walking where healers fear. This is certainly that. But King Valen, consider that the prophecy also mentions the forgotten things that remember what they were. I believe that refers to something beyond the rebel factions, something ancient that your journey might awaken. More ancient than the Sleeper? Riley asked nervously. Different, the Arbiter clarified. The Sleeper represents the fear of change. But there are other cosmic forces, other fundamental principles that were established when the universe was young. The prophecies hint at beings or places that existed before the modern empires, before even the concept of civilization as we understand it. Your journey into rebel territory may bring you face to face with something that predates our entire understanding of galactic history. Valen looked at Ember, seeking her wisdom as he always did when faced with impossible choices. The dragon met his gaze steadily, and through their bond, he felt her answer. Courage wasn't the absence of fear but the decision to move forward despite it. Prepare the ship, Valen commanded. We leave at dawn. Riley, I need you to coordinate with the loyal territories while I'm gone. Thane, maintain defensive positions, but under no circumstances are you to launch offensive strikes against the rebels. That would make us no better than the old regime. And me? Elder Knox asked. Keep studying the prophecies. If there are more warnings, more hints about what we're walking into, I need to know them before we encounter whatever's out there. As the meeting dispersed, Valen remained in the intelligence center, staring at the holographic map of the galaxy. Red markers indicated hostile territories, yellow showed uncertain alliances, and green represented those fully committed to the Accord. There was far more red and yellow than green. Riley approached quietly. You know this might not work. You could make things worse, could give the rebels a perfect target, could prove that the Accord was naive idealism rather than practical policy. I know, Valen admitted. But doing nothing is guaranteed failure. At least this way we're trying. We're living the principles we claim to value. The healer who couldn't walk away from a dying dragon, Riley said softly. I suppose it was inevitable you'd apply that same stubbornness to dying peace. Valen smiled despite the weight of what lay ahead. Stubbornness is such an ugly word. I prefer persistent optimism. That night, as he prepared for the journey, Valen stood once more on the crystal balcony overlooking the nebula. The colors still shifted in those almost deliberate patterns, as if the cosmos itself was watching, waiting to see what choice the unlikely king would make. Ember joined him, her presence warm and reassuring. Together they watched the stars, each one representing countless lives, countless civilizations, all of them affected by the choices made in these critical months. Tomorrow we go where healers fear, Valen said quietly. We face those who would rather see us dead than accept change. We risk everything on the hope that understanding can overcome hatred. Ember's rumble resonated with conviction. She had faced her own death and emerged stronger. She had seen the sleeper and helped calm it. Whatever came next, they would face it together as they always had. The unlikely king and the broken wing restored. Motion and stillness. Change and stability. Together, they would either save the Accord or prove that some divisions were too deep to heal. The galaxy held its breath and waited. The ship that carried Valen into rebel territory was small by military standards, a diplomatic vessel designed for speed rather than firepower. Aboard were Valen and Ember, Rasker and 3 of his reformed warriors, and surprisingly 2 Void collective observers who insisted their presence was essential. The deep void is where our wayward siblings have retreated, one observer explained, their form flickering between translucent and solid. We can guide you through spaces that would shred normal vessels. But be warned, the deep void shows truths that most beings are unprepared to face. Their first destination was a Crimson Dominion colony world called Varkesh, where Warlord Grimlock had declared independence from Empress Vectara's rule. The planet was scarred by centuries of warfare, its surface a patchwork of fortified cities and wastelands where only the strongest survived. As they descended through the atmosphere, weapon systems locked onto their ship immediately. Unidentified vessel, you are entering sovereign territory of the Free Dominion. State your purpose or be destroyed. Valen activated the communication system himself. This is King Valen of the Starforged Empire. I request audience with Warlord Grimlock. I come unarmed and seek only understanding. Silence stretched for long seconds. Then, you've got G-continue 29 deck courage, I'll give you that. Or stupidity. Land at the coordinates I'm sending. Any hostile action and you'll be vapor before you can blink. The landing zone was surrounded by hundreds of armed warriors, their weapons trained on the ship from every angle. As the ramp lowered, Valen could feel the weight of their hostility like a physical pressure. He stepped out alone, leaving even Ember aboard for the moment. The act of vulnerability was deliberate. A healer with no weapons, no armor, no protection except his conviction. Warlord Grimlock was massive even by Vex, their standards, his crimson exoskeleton covered in scars that told stories of countless battles. He approached until he loomed over Valen, all 4 arms crossed in a posture that radiated contempt. So, the heretic king who made our empress weak. I expected someone more impressive. I expected someone more open-minded, Valen replied calmly. But then, expectations are often disappointed. Warlord Grimlock, why do you reject the Accord? Because it's a lie. Grimlock's roar made several warriors flinch. You preach strength through compassion, power through mercy. But I've fought in 300 systems, seen civilizations rise and fall. Every empire that grows soft gets crushed by those willing to do what's necessary. Your Accord is a death sentence dressed in pretty words. Is that what you truly believe? Or is it what you fear? Grimlock's talons extended, razor-sharp and inches from Valen's throat. Choose your next words carefully, King. I fear too, Valen said, not backing away. I fear I'm wrong, that my idealism will get people killed, that trying to change too much too fast will break everything we've built. But I'm more afraid of never trying, of accepting that cruelty and domination are the only paths to survival. He gestured toward the scarred landscape. Your world has known nothing but war for generations. When was the last time crops grew here? When was the last time children played without wondering if bombs would fall? You call the Accord weakness, but I see strength in building rather than destroying, healing rather than harming. Naive philosophy from someone who's never truly fought. You're right. I'm a healer, not a warrior. But I watched Ember fight death itself for 2 years. I've seen her struggle with pain that would have destroyed warriors 10 times your size. And you know what I learned? There's no courage greater than continuing to live when everything tells you to surrender. That's the strength the Accord honors. Grimlock was silent, his multiple eyes studying Valen with new intensity. Finally, your dragon. I heard about her. Heard she was crippled, worthless by our standards. Is she really fully healed? Would you like to see for yourself? At Valen's signal, Ember emerged from the ship. She moved with fluid grace, her wings spreading to their full magnificent span, her scales glowing with inner light. She was power and beauty combined, a living refutation of the idea that what was broken must remain so. Grimlock's warriors stirred, some with fear, others with something that might have been wonder. Impressive, Grimlock admitted grudgingly. But one recovered dragon doesn't prove a philosophy. Then let me ask you something, Warlord. Among your warriors, are there any who've been injured, deemed unfit for service? Veterans whose wounds ended their careers. Of course. War produces casualties. The weak fall, the strong survive. And those casualties, do they still have knowledge? Experience? Wisdom from battles fought? Yes, but their bodies are broken. They can't fight anymore. Can't they? Valen pressed. Or have you simply decided that fighting is the only way they can serve? What if those veterans trained new warriors, shared their tactical knowledge, helped design better defensive systems? What if what you call weakness could be transformed into different strength? For the first time, uncertainty crossed Grimlock's face. Valen could see him considering the implications. The resources being wasted, the knowledge being discarded, all because tradition dictated that warriors who couldn't fight had no value. You're suggesting I rebuild my entire military structure based on compassion? I'm suggesting you consider whether your current structure is truly serving you, or if it's just habit dressed as tradition. Valen softened his tone. I don't expect you to sign the accord today, Warlord. I just ask that you think about whether your fear of weakness might be preventing you from accessing real strength. The meeting ended without resolution, but as Valen's ship departed, he noticed something. Grimlock hadn't ordered them destroyed, hadn't imprisoned them, hadn't even threatened them beyond that initial posturing. It was a small thing, perhaps, but sometimes small things were seeds that grew into transformation. Their next stop was an eternal synthesis world called Sanctum Prime, where the traditional synthesis states had established their stronghold. Here, the resistance wasn't born of warrior pride but religious conviction. High Priest Mortis met them in a temple carved from living crystal, its walls reflecting light in patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. Unlike Grimlock's hostility, Mortis radiated calm certainty, the kind that came from absolute faith. King Valen. The breaker. The disruptor of sacred order. Mortis's voice carried the weight of centuries of tradition. You come seeking to convert us, but we are not children to be swayed by charismatic speeches. We have studied the old texts, the true prophecies, not the cherry-picked verses your arbiter uses to justify heresy. Then share them with me, Valen requested. I want to understand your interpretation. Mortis seemed surprised by the genuine interest, but he gestured to the crystal walls. They flickered, displaying ancient script in a language Valen couldn't read but somehow understood. The prophecy was being translated directly into his consciousness. The cosmos was born in perfection, Mortis intoned. Every species, every world, every purpose assigned by divine will. Change is not growth, it is corruption, the slow decay from intended purpose. The sleeper exists to prevent that decay, to return the universe to its proper state when corruption grows too severe. And you believe I've corrupted the natural order? We know you have. By healing what should have died, by challenging hierarchies that maintain balance, by teaching empires to value what should be discarded. You think you're being merciful, but you're actually prolonging suffering, keeping things alive past their intended purpose. Valen felt anger rise but forced himself to breathe, to center. This wasn't about winning an argument, it was about understanding. High Priest, if the cosmos was born perfect, why did it include the capacity for change? Why do species evolve? Why do civilizations rise and fall? Why does anything grow if perfection was the original state? To test us. To see if we will maintain sacred order or succumb to the temptation of deviation. Or, Valen suggested carefully, perhaps change itself is sacred. Perhaps the cosmos was designed not to be static but dynamic, not to preserve what was but to discover what could be. Heresy. Maybe. Or maybe your interpretations are based on fear that your role, your purpose, becomes less important if change is natural rather than corrupting. Valen moved closer to the crystal wall, studying the ancient text. These prophecies speak of the unlikely king, the breaker, the disruptor. But they also call him the healer. Why include that title if the role was purely destructive? Mortis hesitated, and in that hesitation Valen saw doubt. Not rejection of faith but questioning of interpretation, the crack through which new understanding might eventually flow. I don't ask you to abandon your beliefs, Valen continued. I ask only that you consider whether your understanding of those beliefs might be incomplete. The Arbiter thought they knew the prophecy's meaning too, until events proved otherwise. Perhaps we're all still learning what the cosmos is trying to teach us. As they departed Sanctum Prime, Elder Nox's voice crackled through the communication system. Your Majesty, I've been tracking your journey and analyzing the patterns in your conversations. Each place you visit, you're not just persuading, you're awakening something. The sensors are detecting those same harmonic frequencies we noticed after the Accord signing, but stronger, more focused. What do you think it means? I think the galaxy itself is responding to your willingness to face fear and doubt. The structures we thought were dead technology are actually something else. Consciousness, perhaps, or memory. And they're remembering what they were built for. The final leg of their journey took them into the deep void, guided by the Void Collective observers. Here, space itself became strange. Distances didn't behave normally, light bent in impossible ways, and Valen could swear he saw shapes moving in the darkness that shouldn't exist. This is where our wayward siblings have retreated, the observers explained. But it's also where the forgotten things dwell. King Valen, what you're about to see will challenge everything you think you understand about reality. Through the viewport, Valen saw structures that hurt to look at, geometry that existed in too many dimensions, architecture that seemed to predate the universe itself. And among those structures, he saw beings that made even the sleeper seem comprehensible. They were old. Older than galaxies, older than stars, older than time as living beings measured it. They were the universe's first attempts at consciousness, thought forms that existed before matter learned to think. They had watched everything unfold from the beginning, had seen empires rise and fall countless times, had witnessed the sleeper's first stirring and every awakening since. And they had been waiting for someone like Valen. Someone who questioned what everyone else accepted. Someone who chose healing over tradition, growth over preservation, connection over isolation. The largest of these beings, if large even applied to something that existed partially outside of space, turned its attention toward Valen. He felt its consciousness touch his own, vast and alien but not hostile. Images flooded his mind. The universe's beginning when everything was potential and nothing was fixed. The slow crystallization into form, into rules, into the patterns that the eternal synthesis called sacred order. But also the intentional inclusion of chaos, of change, of the capacity for everything to become something else. The forgotten things showed him their purpose. They were the universe's memory, the keepers of what was and what could be. They had allowed civilizations to develop, to establish their rigid orders and unchanging traditions, because that stability was necessary for a time. But they had also planted seeds, prophecies, ancient texts, structures that would awaken when the time came for the next phase. Valen was that seed's fruition. Not the breaker but the gardener. Not the destroyer of order but the cultivator of evolution. His role wasn't to tear down what was, but to show how it could transform into what needed to be. The being shared one final vision, a galaxy where change and stability danced together, where empires maintained their core identities while freely adapting, where the sleeper watched not with hunger but with curious interest, learning alongside the civilizations it once threatened. But that vision had a cost, and the cost was shown with brutal clarity. Valen would need to give up something fundamental. Not his life but something more essential, his certainty. His belief that he knew the right path. He would need to accept that even his vision of the Accord might be wrong, might need to change, might be just another stepping stone toward something better. Could he do that? Could the Healer King who fought so hard for his beliefs surrender his certainty while maintaining his conviction? As the ship emerged from the deep void, Valen sat in silence, processing what he'd experienced. Ember pressed against him, her warmth a comfort against the existential weight of revelation. The prophecy was right, he said quietly to no one in particular. The healer walks where healers fear. But it's not physical danger that's most frightening, it's the risk of discovering that everything you believed might need to evolve. Riley's voice came through, sounding relieved to have them back in normal space. Your Majesty, we've been monitoring the situations in the territories you visited. Small changes are happening. Grimlock hasn't signed the Accord, but he's consulting with injured veterans about advisory roles. Mortis hasn't renounced the traditional synthesis, but he's called for theological debate about prophecy interpretation. And the Void Collective's isolationists are tentatively reaching out to discuss what you showed them. Progress then, Valen said, though the word felt inadequate after what he'd seen. Your Majesty, Rasker spoke up, his usually stoic expression troubled. What did you see in the deep void? You look like a man who's encountered something that changed him. Valen considered how to answer. I saw the universe's memory. I saw that everything we're doing, the accord, the changes, the challenges, it's all part of something far larger than we imagined. We're not breaking sacred order, Rasker. We're fulfilling it. But fulfilling it requires accepting that even our understanding of it must evolve. As they set course back to the Imperial Spire, Valen knew the hardest part was still ahead. He had faced hostile warlords, fundamentalist priests, and cosmic entities older than comprehension. But now he would have to face his own people, his own council, and explain that the Accord itself might need to change, might need to grow beyond what he'd originally envisioned. The unlikely king had gone where healers fear and returned with knowledge that would test everything he'd built. The question was whether the galaxy was ready for what came next. The answer, he suspected, would reshape existence itself. Valen's return to the Imperial Spire was greeted not with celebration but with crisis. In his absence, tensions that had been simmering had reached a breaking point. High Chancellor Morvis met him at the landing bay, his expression grave. Your Majesty, we have 3 critical situations developing simultaneously. The Crimson Dominion's loyalist forces and Grimlock's rebels are on the verge of civil war. The Eternal Synthesis's arbiter has been challenged by Mortis for religious authority. And most troubling, massive energy signatures are appearing throughout the galaxy, identical to what we detected from the Sleeper. Valen felt exhaustion weighing on him but pushed it aside. The Sleeper is waking again? Not waking. Responding. Elder Nox joined them, looking ancient and frail but intellectually vibrant. Your journey into the deep void triggered something, Your Majesty. Those harmonic frequencies are actually communication. The galaxy itself is trying to tell us something. The forgotten things you encountered are sending a message through every ancient structure we've discovered. What message? Nox's hands trembled as he pulled up holographic displays. It's complicated. The structures are projecting images, scenes from galactic history we never knew existed. Empires that came before ours, civilizations that faced the same choice we're facing now. Some chose absolute order and eventually stagnated into extinction. Others chose unchecked change and tore themselves apart. But a few, very few, found the balance. Show me. The hologram shifted, displaying an ancient empire called the Luminar Concordat. They had existed 3 billion years ago, long before modern civilizations arose. Like the current galaxy, they had struggled with the tension between order and change, tradition and evolution. Their solution had been radical. They established what they called crucibles of transformation, designated spaces and times where change was not just permitted but required, balanced by pillars of continuity, where core values remained protected. It's dynamic equilibrium, Riley observed, studying the data. Not static balance but responsive flow. When change threatened to overwhelm continuity, the pillars provided anchor. When stasis threatened to stifle growth, the crucibles ensured evolution continued. And this empire succeeded? Valen asked. Nox's expression was complex. They didn't just succeed, they transcended. The forgotten things suggest that the Luminar Concordat eventually evolved beyond physical form, becoming part of the cosmic structure itself. What we think of as natural laws, gravity, entropy, evolution, might actually be their legacy, their final gift to the universe. The implications were staggering. But before Valen could process them fully, Commander Thane burst into the chamber. Your Majesty, Empress Vectara is requesting immediate communication. It's marked urgent and personal. The hologram of Vectara materialized, and Valen was shocked by her appearance. The proud Empress looked diminished, her exoskeleton dulled, her 6 eyes reflecting pain he'd never seen before. King Valen. I need your help. The words clearly cost her pride to speak. Grimlock has declared not just independence but war. Half my empire has sided with him, believing that I've betrayed everything the Crimson Dominion represents. My own generals question whether I'm fit to lead. I face either surrendering my throne to traditionalist forces or plunging my people into civil war that could cost billions of lives. Valen felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This was the price of change, not just transformation itself, but the chaos that transformation could unleash if not carefully guided. Your Majesty, what would you have me do? Come to Varkesh. Face Grimlock with me. He respects you in a way he no longer respects me. You've proven yourself to him through that first meeting. Perhaps together we can find a path that avoids genocide. It was a trap, potentially. Grimlock could simply kill them both, eliminating two obstacles to his vision of restored traditional rule. But it was also an opportunity, the chance to demonstrate what the Accord truly meant when everything hung in the balance. I'll come, Valen agreed. But I'm bringing something with me. Elder Nox, can you transmit the data about the Luminar Concordat to Varkesh? I want Grimlock to see what we've discovered. Before departing, Valen called a council meeting. The chamber was packed not just with regular members but representatives from across the galaxy who had traveled to the Spire seeking guidance as their own worlds teetered on the edge of chaos. I know you're all frightened, Valen began, his voice carrying despite his exhaustion. The Accord was supposed to bring stability, but instead it's revealed every fault line in our galactic civilization. Change is hard. Growth is painful. And right now, many are questioning whether the cost is worth the benefit. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I've seen things in the deep void that changed my understanding of everything. The universe is older, stranger, and more intentional than we ever imagined. What we're experiencing now, this crisis, this chaos, it's not a failure. It's a crucible. A test to see if we can become what the forgotten things believe we might be capable of becoming. Morvis spoke up, his voice strained. Your Majesty, I've supported your reign despite my doubts. But my people are asking questions I can't answer. How do we know this isn't just making things worse? How do we know the old ways, however harsh, weren't actually better for ensuring survival? We don't, Valen admitted, and the honest answer sent shocked murmurs through the chamber. I can't promise you that the Accord will succeed. I can't guarantee that change won't cause more pain before it brings benefit. What I can promise is this. If we abandon the attempt now, if we retreat to the old ways out of fear, we'll never know what we could have become. We'll choose certain stagnation over uncertain growth. He gestured to the holographic display showing the Luminar Concordat. Ancient civilizations faced this choice. Some chose safety and died slowly. Others chose chaos and died quickly. But a few found the courage to balance both, to honor tradition while embracing evolution, to maintain identity while adapting to new realities. Those civilizations transcended everything we think is possible. The Arbiter's hologram flickered into existence, looking haggard. King Valen, I face a crisis similar to Empress Vectaris. Mortis has convinced half the eternal synthesis that I've been corrupted by secular philosophy. But more troubling, the ancient structures in our most sacred temple complexes are displaying the same messages Elder Nox described. Our priests are divided between those who see this as divine revelation and those who believe it's some kind of elaborate heresy. It's neither, Valen replied. It's education. The universe itself is teaching us what we need to know to survive the next phase of existence. The question is whether we're humble enough to be students. A void collective observer manifested, their form more solid than Valen had ever seen. Our isolationists have emerged from the deep void, but they bring troubling news. They claim the sleeper is not just observing anymore, it's participating. Actively influencing events. Subtle testing whether civilizations can genuinely balance order and change. This entire crisis might be the sleeper's way of evaluating whether we're worthy of coexistence. Then we must not fail that test, Valen declared. Here's what I propose. We establish the first crucible of transformation on Varkesh. A gathering of all factions, loyalists and rebels, traditionalists and reformers, those who fear change and those who embrace it. We don't try to force agreement. Instead, we create a space where honest dialogue can happen, where fears can be expressed without judgment, where new ideas can be tested without requiring immediate universal acceptance. That's remarkably vague, Your Majesty, Lord Garrick noted. What specifically would this crucible accomplish? It would acknowledge that transformation isn't instantaneous conversion but gradual evolution. It would give the rebels a voice without requiring them to submit. It would let traditionalists maintain their core values while exploring how those values might adapt to new circumstances. Most importantly, it would demonstrate that we trust the process of change itself, rather than trying to control every outcome. Riley stepped forward. I've run simulations based on the Luminar Concordat's models. If we can establish even one successful crucible, it creates a template that others can follow. Success breeds success. But Your Majesty, the first attempt is the most dangerous. If it fails visibly, it could shatter confidence in the entire Accord. Then we must not fail, Valen said simply. Empress Vectara, I'll depart for Varkesh within the hour. Arbiter, can you send representatives to join us? This needs to be a galactic endeavor, not just a Dominion internal matter. I'll come personally, the Arbiter replied. If my presence in the Crucible costs me my position, so be it. Some principles are worth more than power. As preparations began, Ember found Valen in his chambers, staring out at the nebula that continued its now familiar dance across the sky. She pressed her massive head against his back, and through their bond, he felt her question. Was he afraid? Terrified, he admitted aloud. Everything I've worked for comes down to this. If the Crucible fails, if Grimlock and the rebels reject dialogue, if the crisis escalates instead of resolving, Ember, I could be responsible for fracturing the galaxy beyond repair. The dragon's rumble was gentle but firm. She showed him through their connection what she remembered, lying broken and dying, knowing that traditional wisdom said she should be left to die. Feeling Valen's hands working on her damaged wings, day after day, refusing to accept what everyone else took for granted. The slow emergence of hope where there had been only despair. Transformation was always terrifying because the outcome was uncertain. But the alternative, accepting brokenness as permanent, was a death of spirit even if the body survived. You're right, Valen said, standing straighter. I healed you when everyone said it was impossible. I calmed the sleeper when everyone said it was inevitable destruction. I can do this. We can do this. Rasker entered, fully armored. Your Majesty, the ship is ready. I've selected a security team of warriors from all empires, Dominion, Synthesis, Collective, and Starforged. They'll demonstrate unity even if words fail to. Good thinking, Rasker. Symbols matter as much as speeches sometimes. As they boarded the ship, Valen noticed something that made his heart swell with hope. Dragons. Dozens of them from across the Empire and beyond had gathered at the landing bay. Ember's recovery had inspired them to emerge from hiding, and now they chose to escort the diplomatic vessel to Varkesh. It was an aerial procession of reclaimed strength, a sky filled with wings that had been written off but now soared once more. The journey to Varkesh felt both endless and instantaneous. Valen used the time to study everything they knew about the Luminar Concordat, about the sleeper's patterns of evaluation, about the psychology of beings facing existential uncertainty. He was no longer just a healer dealing with individual patients or even a king managing an empire. He had become something the galaxy had never quite seen before. A species of diplomat who negotiated not just between civilizations but between cosmic principles themselves. When they arrived at Varkesh, the scene was tense but not immediately hostile. Grimlock had assembled his forces, but rather than attacking positions, they stood at attention, warriors prepared for battle but waiting for orders. Empress Vectara's loyalist fleet held position opposite them, creating a standoff that could explode into violence with a single wrong move. The landing zone was neutral territory, a plateau that rose above both encampments. As Valen emerged, followed by Ember, Rasker, the Arbiter, and representatives from every major faction, he saw Grimlock waiting with his generals. And behind him, to Valen's surprise, were the veterans, the injured warriors who Grimlock had begun consulting after their first meeting. They stood in positions of honor, their scarred bodies and damaged armor worn with new pride. King Valen, Grimlock's voice carried across the plateau. You kept your word. You came unarmed into hostile territory, knowing I could end you with a single command. That takes either courage or madness. Perhaps both, Valen replied. Warlord Grimlock, I've brought something I want you to see. Something that might change how we all understand the choice we're facing. As Elder Nox's team projected the data about the Luminar Concordat, about the crucibles of transformation and pillars of continuity, Valen watched Grimlock's expression shift. The warlord was intelligent. He grasped the implications immediately. You're suggesting we don't have to choose between the old ways and the new. That we can maintain what works while adapting what doesn't. More than suggesting. I'm proposing we prove it. Right here, right now. Let Varkesh become the first crucible. A place where transformation happens deliberately, where fears are addressed honestly, where change is guided rather than feared or forced. Grimlock was silent for a long moment. Then he gestured to his veterans. These warriors were discarded. Your words made me reconsider that waste. They've been helping me understand what you meant about different forms of strength. I'm willing to listen more. But listening isn't the same as surrendering my principles. No one's asking you to surrender anything, Empress Vectara spoke up, her voice regaining some of its former strength. The Accord was never meant to erase what makes us who we are. It was meant to help us become better versions of ourselves. The Arbiter added, the eternal synthesis has guarded sacred truths for millennia. But perhaps we've confused the truths themselves with our interpretation of them. Perhaps the divine will is not frozen in the past but evolving toward the future. Fine words, Grimlock challenged. But words are easy. What specifically changes if I agree to this crucible? What do I get that I don't already have through independence? Valen smiled. You get what every warrior values most: purpose that transcends individual battles. You get to be part of something larger, something that could reshape the galaxy. You get to prove that strength and compassion aren't opposites, that the warrior spirit can adapt without being destroyed. You get to be remembered not as the warlord who rebelled, but as the one who helped forge a new understanding of what strength means. He could see the appeal in those words working on Grimlock. Warriors lived for legacy, for the knowledge that their struggles mattered beyond immediate conquest. And the sleeper? Grimlock asked. Is it truly evaluating us, or is that just convenient mysticism to justify your policies? As if in answer, the sky above Varkesh darkened. Not with threat but with presence. The sleeper's consciousness touched the gathering, not consuming, not threatening, simply observing with what might have been interest? Curiosity? Through the contact, Valen felt the sleeper's question echoing in all their minds. Could beings of matter and limited consciousness truly balance the eternal dance between stability and change? Could they learn in lifetimes what had taken cosmic forces eons to understand? The answer, Valen realized, wasn't his to give alone. It was collective. It required every being present, warrior and healer, traditionalist and reformer, order and chaos, to choose consciously, deliberately, courageously. He extended his hand to Grimlock. Help us find out. The plateau fell silent as everyone watched to see what the warlord would do. The entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath, waiting for a decision that would determine not just the Accord's fate but possibly existence itself. Grimlock stared at the offered hand, at Ember glowing beside Valen, at the dragons filling the sky, at the veterans who had found new purpose, at the cosmic presence observing them all. And then, slowly, the warlord reached out and clasped Valen's hand. Let's build your crucible, Healer King. But I warn you, I'll speak my truth honestly even when it contradicts yours. That's part of the balance too. I wouldn't want it any other way, Valen replied, feeling hope surge through him like Ember's light. The first crucible of transformation was born not through conquest or surrender, but through the willingness of former enemies to become partners in an uncertain journey. It wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, disagreements, moments when old patterns reasserted themselves. But it was beginning. And sometimes, a beginning was all the universe needed to demonstrate that impossible things were actually just difficult things waiting for the right approach. The sleeper's presence withdrew, and in its wake, Valen felt something he hadn't expected: approval. Not completion, not success, but the cosmic equivalent of a teacher watching a student grasp a difficult concept for the first time. The real work was just beginning. But for the first time since this entire journey started, Valen believed they might actually succeed. 6 months after the establishment of the first crucible of transformation on Varkesh, the galaxy had changed in ways both subtle and profound. Valen stood in what had once been Grimlock's war room and was now a hybrid space, part military command center, part meditation hall, part diplomatic forum. The walls displayed real-time data from 12 crucibles that had been established across different empires, each one adapting the core principles to local needs while maintaining the essential balance. Grimlock entered, and Valen still found it surreal to see the massive warlord carrying not weapons but data tablets, his 4 arms juggling information streams with the same intensity he'd once brought to battle strategy. The 8th crucible is showing remarkable results, Grimlock reported, his voice carrying satisfaction Valen had never heard before. The Void Collective's hybrid colony has managed to integrate isolationist and connective philosophies in ways we never imagined possible. They're calling it selective engagement, maintaining the deep void connection that defines their culture while building limited but meaningful relationships with external civilizations. And the challenges? Valen asked, knowing that nothing worthwhile came without difficulty. The 3rd crucible is struggling. The eternal synthesis traditionalists are clashing with the reformers more violently than anticipated. Mortis has accused the arbiter of heresy so many times that the word has lost meaning. But Grimlock's expression was complex. Even there, something interesting is happening. The conflict itself is teaching them that disagreement doesn't have to mean division. They're learning to hold opposing views without requiring one side to dominate the other completely. Riley joined them, looking exhausted but energized. Your Majesty, the galactic infrastructure projects are ahead of schedule. Having the empires cooperate on shared endeavors, the trade routes, the communication networks, the disaster response systems, is creating bonds that transcend political agreements. When you work side by side saving lives during a crisis, old enmities become harder to maintain. Elder Knox shuffled in, looking somehow younger despite his advanced age. The Forgotten Things continue to communicate through the ancient structures. They've shown us 17 more examples of civilizations that attempted the Crucible approach. 9 succeeded, 8 failed. The pattern is clear. Success required willingness to abandon certainty while maintaining conviction. Paradoxical, but apparently essential. How do you abandon certainty while maintaining conviction? Rasker asked, joining the gathering. That seems philosophically impossible. It means accepting that your convictions might need to evolve, Valen explained, something he'd learned through painful experience. You remain committed to core principles, compassion, strength, truth, growth, but stay open to the possibility that your understanding of those principles is incomplete. It's the difference between dogma and wisdom. Ember, who had been resting near the window, raised her head and rumbled urgently. Through their bond, Valen felt her alarm, not danger but significance. Something was approaching. The sky above Varkesh began to shimmer. Not with the darkness of the sleeper, but with light that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes were designed to perceive. The Forgotten Things were manifesting, not just communicating through ancient structures but actually appearing in a form that physical beings could somewhat comprehend. Their voice resonated not through sound but directly in consciousness, each being hearing it in a way that made sense to their unique perception. King Valen. Warlord Grimlock. All who have participated in the crucibles of transformation. You have passed the first evaluation. The sleeper observes not with hunger but with interest. You have demonstrated capacity for the balance that the universe requires. Valen felt a surge of hope, but the Forgotten Things weren't finished. However, demonstration and implementation are different challenges. The Luminar Concordat succeeded for 3 million years before transcending. You have succeeded for 6 months. The true test lies ahead, maintaining this balance across generations, through inevitable failures and setbacks, when the initial enthusiasm fades and the hard work of sustained transformation begins. What can we do to ensure long-continue 11:20-term success? Valen asked. Institutionalize flexibility. Create structures that are designed to evolve. Train leaders not just in governance but in adaptation. Most importantly, remember that the goal is not perfect balance. Perfection is static. The goal is dynamic equilibrium, constant adjustment, eternal dance between order and change. The Forgotten Things shared a final vision, not of what would be but of what could be. A galaxy where empires maintained distinct identities while freely sharing knowledge. Where tradition was honored without becoming prison. Where innovation was celebrated without becoming chaos. Where the sleeper rested peacefully, no longer threatened by change because change itself had learned wisdom. But the vision also showed the alternative. A future where the crucibles failed, where fear reasserted itself, where the old patterns of domination and resistance resumed. That path led not to the sleeper's violent awakening but to something perhaps worse. Slow entropy, gradual decline, the heat death of civilizational will to grow. The choice, the Forgotten Things concluded, is always yours. The universe provides opportunity, not guarantee. We will observe, will guide when asked, but cannot force evolution. That must come from within. Their presence faded, leaving the gathered beings in contemplative silence. Finally, Empress Vectara's hologram materialized. She had been listening remotely. So, we've passed the test, but the real exam is the rest of our existence. No pressure. Despite the gravity, several people chuckled. It was precisely the kind of dry humor that the old Vectara would never have shown, another small sign of transformation. Your Majesty, Morvis's voice joined via communication link. I have a proposal. What if we establish a permanent institution dedicated to maintaining the crucibles? Not governance in the traditional sense but facilitation. A body that helps new crucibles form, provides resources for struggling ones, shares successes across cultural boundaries. The Guild of Transformation, Riley suggested. Representatives from every empire, every philosophy. Their only authority is moral, the power of demonstrated success rather than enforced compliance. Grimlock's growl might have been approval. I like it. Warriors respect what proves effective in actual combat, not what sounds good in theory. Let each crucible prove its value through results, and the guild can help spread those lessons. The Arbiter added, and we need educational systems that teach the principles underlying the crucibles. Not indoctrination but skills, how to hold productive disagreement, how to honor tradition while embracing change, how to maintain identity while collaborating across differences. These should be universal competencies taught from childhood. As they refined the proposal, Valen felt something shifting in his own understanding. He had started this journey as a healer who couldn't walk away from a dying dragon. He had become a reluctant king, then a cosmic diplomat, then something the galaxy had no name for. And now he realized the next phase, becoming obsolete in the best possible way. I think, Valen said carefully, that the Guild of Transformation shouldn't be led by me or any current ruler. It should be led by the next generation, beings who grew up with the Accord, who don't remember the old ways as fondly as we do. They'll be able to see possibilities we're still too close to our old patterns to imagine. The suggestion was met with thoughtful silence. You're proposing to hand power to people with less experience? Garrick asked skeptically. I'm proposing to hand responsibility to people with less baggage, Valen clarified. We're all marked by the old systems, by the conflicts that shaped us. The next generation can build on what we've learned without being constrained by what we've lived through. That's how real transformation happens, not through perfect leaders, but through each generation improving on what came before. Rasker spoke quietly. That's actually wise. In my 3 centuries of fighting, I've seen warriors become less effective as they age, not because of physical decline but because they can't adapt to new tactics. They're too invested in what worked before. Perhaps the same applies to civilization. Over the following months, the Guild of Transformation took shape. Young beings from every empire were recruited not based on their achievements but on their potential, their creativity, their ability to think beyond established boundaries. Valen found himself increasingly in an advisory role rather than a leadership one, exactly as he'd intended. Ember, too, had become something new. Dragons across the galaxy looked to her not as a ruler but as a teacher, sharing the lessons of her recovery with others who had been damaged and discarded. She established what she called wings of renewal, sanctuaries where broken things could heal, not to return to what they were but to discover what they might become. One evening, Valen found himself back on the crystal balcony of the Imperial Spire, watching the nebula that had witnessed his entire journey. Ember joined him, her presence as comforting as it had been on that first night when he'd made the choice to try saving her. We did it, he said softly. Not perfectly, not completely, but we did it. We changed the galaxy. Ember's rumble was gentle, and through their bond she corrected him. They hadn't changed the galaxy. They had helped the galaxy remember how to change itself. Riley found them there as dawn approached. Your Majesty, I have the final reports from all 12 crucibles. Overall success rate is 68%. Some thriving, some struggling, all learning. The Guild of Transformation officially takes over coordination in 2 weeks. Your presence will be requested for the transition ceremony, but after that. She smiled. You're technically unemployed. Good, Valen replied, surprising her. I was never meant to be king forever. I was meant to be a healer who proved that healing was possible on a cosmic scale. Mission accomplished. Time for the next generation to take what we started and make it their own. So what will you do? Valen looked at Ember and through their bond felt her answer. They would travel. Would visit the crucibles not as authority figures but as participants. Would offer healing where it was needed and wisdom where it was requested. Would continue the work they'd always done, just on a larger scale. We'll keep walking where healers fear, he said. That's what we do. The transition ceremony 2 weeks later was both ending and beginning. Valen formally dissolved his role as primary coordinator of the Accord, passing authority to the Guild's elected leadership, a diverse group of young beings who looked at the galaxy's challenges with fresh eyes and innovative thinking. In his final address, Valen spoke not of his achievements but of the journey that led to them. I saved a dying dragon because I couldn't walk away. That choice created ripples that became waves that reshaped the cosmos. But those ripples weren't mine alone, they were ours. Every being who chose courage over fear, growth over stagnation, connection over isolation created their own ripples. Together, those ripples became the tide that lifted all of us. He gestured to Ember, to the Guild's new leaders, to the representatives from across the galaxy. The story you've been told is about the unlikely king and the dragon he healed. But the true story is about a galaxy that learned to heal itself, about civilizations that chose to believe change was possible, about the eternal dance between order and chaos finding its rhythm. My reign is ending but the work continues. Not through one king or one dragon, but through every being who chooses transformation over stagnation, dialogue over domination, healing over harm. That's the legacy I hope we've built. Not a perfect system but an evolving one, Not a final answer but an ongoing question. What kind of galaxy do we wish to create? As he stepped down from the platform, the assembled beings rose in respect, not bowing to authority, but acknowledging partnership in a shared journey. The sleeper's presence touched the gathering one final time, not speaking but conveying something like satisfaction. The cosmic test wasn't complete, it would never be complete, but this chapter had demonstrated that sentient beings could learn, could grow, could become worthy of coexistence with the fundamental forces of the universe. Later, as Valen and Ember prepared to depart on their first journey as private citizens, Grimlock approached with something in his claws, a crystal tablet inscribed with words from every language in the galaxy. We wanted you to have this. A reminder of what one healer and one dragon accomplished when they refused to accept that the broken must stay broken. Valen read the inscription. Here begins not an ending but a continuation. The unlikely king showed us the path. We walk it still, knowing that every step forward requires courage, that every transformation demands patience, that every healing begins with the simple choice to try. He looked at Grimlock, at the warlord who had become a partner in transformation. Thank you. For taking the risk. For being willing to change. Thank you, Grimlock replied, for showing me that true strength includes the courage to admit when strength alone isn't enough. As their ship lifted off from Varkesh for the last time as royalty, Valen looked back at the world that had hosted the first crucible. It was thriving now, a place where warriors and healers worked side by side, where tradition and innovation danced together, where the broken came to be transformed rather than discarded. The galaxy sprawled before them, full of crucibles needing support, beings needing healing, challenges requiring the kind of stubborn optimism that had started this entire journey. Ember spread her wings, wings that had been broken but now soared, and through their bond, Valen felt her joy at the journey ahead. They were no longer king and symbol. They were healer and partner, walking where healers fear, proving again and again that the impossible was just the difficult waiting for someone stubborn enough to try. The story of the alien king and the disabled dragon had become the story of a galaxy learning to heal itself. And that story, Valen knew with quiet certainty, was far from over. It was only just beginning. The end. And the beginning,